This video is going to discuss the learning material for week 2. So I'm beginning on the opening page for this introduction, the digital revolution, and I'm going to go into the module. And you'll notice that I have some highlights in here already, but as mentioned in the previous video, this is a very short introduction module before we get into the actual sort of chapter content. So we're going to just talk kind of about the timeline, the history of how we got to where we are today with computers. You are doing something similar in the 1411 class, but the information in this module is slightly different. So I just want to start off on this opening page saying that the information age, which is what we are in right now, is very unique because a lot of the underlying technology is based on digital electronics. And you know that. You probably have multiple electronic devices in your home. I know that I do, and I have children, and I periodically have to take their digital electronic devices away from them just so that, they will communicate with me in person and not get headaches and things, which is a symptom of overuse. So that's really all that's on this page. We already talked about the terminology issues and them not being linked. Okay, so getting on into the actual content. Let's see, that was just a sample thing that I was trying in the last video. One of the things is that an interesting characteristic of digital content is that it can be easily duplicated with no loss of quality. Now, you all have grown up with digital content, and so it's just a given for you, but for someone who grew up making photocopies and dubbing my own cassette tape mixes and things like that, every subsequent copy became progressively worse. Yes, that was definitely true, but you don't have to worry about that with digital content. So it's very nice today that we don't lose quality. All right, that was a very short page. So data processing, this is the first phase of the digital revolution that we're going to talk about. In fact, there are 5 phases. So data processing, personal computing, network computing, cloud computing, and ubiquitous computing. Those are the 5 phases. So we are starting with data processing. And I'm not going to read everything to you. As I was reading, I went through and highlighted some things that I thought I would just speak to just briefly. So in this phase, it says computers were huge, complex, and expensive devices that stored data on reels of magnetic tape. And then some other things came along too, like floppy disks later on. It says they existed in limited numbers, primarily housed in big corporations and government agencies, and computers were operated by trained technicians because they were very complex, and they didn't really come with user manuals many times. And so these technicians had to be trained. I left a note for you, or I attempted to share a note. I'm not seeing it show up in my view, that mentions the Hidden Figures movie. If you have not seen that movie, you should really watch it. It is a great sort of documentary, but very interesting movie about 3 African American women who worked at NASA. They were mathematicians, and NASA got a computer that took up like a whole room, and no one knew how to operate it, and these ladies figured out how to do that, and so they were really famous mathematicians, but credited for that. I watched it when it first came out, and it was a really good movie. Anyway, moving along, let's see. The method of computing back then was called centralized computing, and that is where a main computer holds all of the data and performs all of the processing. Does that sound familiar? Because we're going to revisit this in another couple of pages. Let's see. So computers were not in the home at this point. Computers did not enter the home environments until this second phase, dubbed as personal computing. And so sometime in the 1970s, that's when consumers were able to purchase computing devices, and they were quite expensive. This says $3,000. I bought my first one in 1995, and I paid about $2,000 for a monitor, a computer, and I might have gotten a dot matrix printer. I can't even remember now. Anyway, they're quite expensive and very little memory, very small hard drives. Of course, at the time we thought they were big, but in today's, comparing to today's devices, very small. One of the key features of this personal computing phase is that computers were not connected to networks at this time. You bought a computer and you used it at your house, mainly to do word processing, to type research papers. There were very rudimentary spreadsheets, those type of things. That PowerPoint did not exist back then. Things were running on DOS. If you had a PC, they were running on DOS. So Windows did not exist in this early stage of computing. So very, very rudimentary computers. I found this interesting. Social scientists worried that if personal computing became widespread, people would become increasingly isolated as they focused on computer activities rather than social ones. And that is a concern today as well, that people spend so much time on devices that they are losing the ability to interact face to face. Still being social because they're all over social media, all over online gaming environments. And so learning to communicate in a virtual environment, yes, but losing that ability to hold a conversation, carry on a conversation face to face. And so that is a concern today. Let's see. Moving into this third phase, this is when computers became networked, and so the internet came on the scene. In case you weren't aware, the internet was originally developed as a military project, Department of Defense actually, and was later handed over to the National Science Foundation for research and academic use. And then sometime in the early 90s, they allowed commercial use for the internet, and so that's when it really took off. Just to note, the internet and the web are many times used interchangeably, but they actually mean two different things. The internet is actually, if you look up internet versus web, most websites will tell you that the internet is considered to be the communication protocol, the hardware portion, the wires, the satellites, cables, all of that form the internet backbone. And the web is the material that you access. So here it says link documents, graphics, audio. So it's all the content. Let's see. These are things that as networks grew, these are the things that seem to really take off. Cloud computing is the fourth phase and kind of where we are today. This says it began around 2010 and we are still here. And cloud computing has really taken off just in recent years with Office 365, which we talked about last week in the lab portion of the class. A lot of people are going to these cloud-based environments so that they don't have to load these large programs onto their computer, and they always have the most updated version, and so it's becoming very popular to use the cloud to access things like that and to store files. One of the big advantages of cloud file storage is that you can get to your files from anywhere. You don't have to carry your computer around with you. And so here we revisit centralized computing. It says the concept of applications and data residing somewhere other than your local device is common to both centralized and cloud computing. So, that concept came up in phase 2, and here we're visiting it again. Let's see, I didn't think, there we go. Social media. So we'll actually cover a whole chapter later on social media. In fact, a lot of the topics that were being introduced here, we have a chapter on later. But I just wanted to mention here that instead of computers decreasing human interaction, social media encourages those communications and relationships. Now, again, in a virtual environment, and so you still have to practice those face-to-face meetings, but especially with the pandemic going on right now, virtual communication is becoming quite popular for meetings, and so that people don't have to travel and things like that. Also interesting, and I guess sort of a downfall of cloud computing, is that we give up privacy rights. Anytime we lose local control, we have to be concerned about who is accessing our data. So back in the personal computing phase, when you had a computer at your house and it was not on a network, you only had to worry about somebody breaking in your house and getting on your computer, to worry about your files or your data being stolen. But now, because of cloud computing, it's not even residing on your computer anymore. It's residing on some server sitting somewhere. You don't even know where. You don't even know where the server's located. And so who knows who has access to that? Okay, and the last phase is ubiquitous computing, which we mentioned, I think, in the previous video. But this phase is characterized by a focus on manipulating real-world objects instead of data. And so some of the examples they give are virtual reality and augmented reality, and I'm sure that most of you have experience with those things. I wanted to mention Internet of Things. Hopefully you've heard of that. But it connects sensors embedded in a lot of things, machines, things in your house. Something personal I wanted to mention, just as an example, my daughter-in-law is diabetic, and she has to keep a very close eye on her insulin levels. And I don't pretend to know a lot about it because I'm not diabetic and didn't really have experience with that before she joined our family last year. But my son stays very concerned about her, and she recently just purchased this device that she sticks on her stomach, and it is a constant monitor of her insulin levels and sends updates, automatic updates to her phone and to my son's phone. So, he knows if her levels go really low or really high, and, then they can intervene with whatever they need to, insulin or a snack or whatever. And so, it's really helping them have a better quality of life. And so there have been lots of strides in the medical arena about the Internet of Things and these embedded sensors and things. All right, and I just wanted to end because this is the intro module. Not to read all of this to you, but just to say that try to keep the big picture in mind. This class focuses on technology and specifically getting our majors ready for upper level classes, just kind of give you a foundation. But this book's going to touch on a lot of issues that are important to you just as a member of a technological society. So be thinking as you go through here about how that relates to privacy, or we have a whole chapter on security, intellectual property, things like that. So just keep that big picture in mind as you go through this. All right, so that's it for the material. And don't forget you've got a quiz over this introduction material as well as that journal to complete for this week.